You are listening to Lighthearted, the official podcast of the United States Lighthouse Society. My name is Jeremy D'Entremont. Welcome. My co-host today is Cindy Johnson, ace copy editor and award-winning volunteer for Friends of Portsmouth Harbor Lighthouses. Hi, Cindy.
Hi, Jeremy.
This is December 18th, 2022, and this is episode 204 of Lighthearted. In a few minutes, we'll listen to part one of a two-part interview with the past and present owners of Borden Flats Lighthouse in Fall River, Massachusetts. First, I want to talk a little bit about a great New England tradition that's related to lighthouses, the Flying Santa. Cindy, can you help me out? Let's give a little history of the Flying Santa program.
Sure, Jeremy. The Flying Santa tradition goes back to Christmas in 1929 to a float plane pilot named William Winkapaw in Friendship, Maine. We're going to listen to an audio clip now from a past episode. This is Brian Tague, who is the longtime president of Friends of Flying Santa, talking about how Captain Bill Winkapaw started the flights.
Captain Winkapaw was a native of Friendship, Maine. He got his title captain from being a boat captain. Before he got into aviation, he did a lot of boating and fishing, and he got into flying and was pretty well known as an early pioneer in aviation. And he flew seaplanes and wheeled planes, and he got into transporting freight and passengers. And at one point, he was shipping gold over the mountains in South America in the Andes. But his base of operations, for the most part, was up in the Rockland area. With his job of flying around to the different islands, he'd be picking up passengers or delivering freight. He got to know a lot of the lighthouse keepers and the life-saving crews. And just one Christmas in 1929, he thought it'd be neat to recognize them on the holiday. So he put together about a half dozen packages of, I would say, magazines, newspaper, coffee, tea, candy, and things like that. And he went up Christmas morning and made the run and threw the packages out and went back home and had Christmas dinner with his family. And in the days that followed, he got a lot of feedback from the keepers and their families, how much they appreciated being recognized. He realized that this was something special for them and decided that he'd make a tradition and do it every year.
In the mid-1930s, Edward Rowe Snow, a school teacher, maritime historian, and author in Winthrop, Massachusetts, became involved in the flights. He would eventually become the sole Flying Santa, keeping the flights going through 1980 and flying to as many as 176 lighthouses a year. We're going to hear an audio clip now from a Boston radio program called Contact from the 1960s. The host, Bob Kennedy, interviewed Edward Rowe Snow just before he took off as the Flying Santa.
It's a rather cold, kind of snowy morning here at Norwood Airport, and the gentleman standing next to me looks like Santa Claus. In fact, kind of a special Santa Claus, a flying Santa Claus. And as I look a little closer, it kind of looks like a fellow we know very well here on Contact, Ed Rowe Snow. How are you, Ed? And kind of a little early Merry Christmas to you.
I'm very happy to be here, and I'm feeling pretty good, and Merry Christmas to you, Bob.
Ed Rowe Snow, I thought you mainly stayed aboard or near the sea. How come the airplane and how come the flying Santa Claus?
Well, we fly out over the sea in this plane, and we will leave in just a few moments. We will cover about 1,600 miles today and go down into Maryland as our greatest objective of the day. Also, we will stop at Martha's Vineyard. We will stop at Nantucket Island. We will stop at Block Island. And meanwhile, as we go to and from those various airports, we will drop from our plane about 112 bundles.
Ed, so how long have you been the Flying Santa?
My first year was 1936, and I've been doing it every year, except one when I was in the North African invasion. So this will be the 27th trip.
Edward Rowe Snow did the flights most years with his wife, Anna Merle, and their daughter, Dolly. Next, we're going to hear a clip of Dolly Snow Bicknell talking about her earliest memories of the Flying Santa flights.
So you first went on a Flying Santa flight when you were 1 year old, or less than 1 year old, right? And I don't think you remember too much about that one, but what are some of your earliest memories of the Flying Santa flights?
Well, words like rough, bumpy. I loved that open window. As soon when he'd open the window to drop the packages out, it was just so nice.
That's some air.
Yes. It was usually a 5-seat plane. I remember Piper, Apache, Aztec, Comanche. I don't know if those are real names, but I remember those. The pilot would always be in the front left, and my dad would be in the window right behind him with that special window that opened at the top. And then the front right would usually be a photographer, and behind him, next to my dad, would be my mother. And then I'd be in the back, in the middle, with packages all around me, packed left, right, up, down. And did I say rough and bumpy? I think I did. Yeah. Each year it would be, should we try Dramamine? Should we try no Dramamine? Should we try breakfast? No breakfast? Made no difference. It was rough and it was difficult. But I kind of knew it was kind of special because everybody was pretty happy when they saw him.
The Hull Life-Saving Museum on Boston's South Shore kept the tradition alive for some years, and then the Friends of Flying Santa was formed as a separate nonprofit organization in 1997.
We're going to hear another clip of Brian Tague. In this one, he talks about the purpose of the flights today.
The primary purpose of the flights is to show appreciation for the Coast Guard families. I think it's an underappreciated branch of the military. They do an awful lot with very little, and they don't get much recognition for what they do. And I've gotten to be friends with a lot of these folks over the years, and these men and women, whether they're on cutters that are gone for 3 months or at boat stations for 2 days on and 2 days off. It's a tough family experience because you could be moving from Massachusetts to Oregon to Florida to Texas, and they don't always have family around for the holidays. So to be here in New England and be able to look forward to the Flying Santa event and know that Santa is coming to your mother or father's Coast Guard station because you're special and we're showing appreciation for it, and Flying Santa is looking out for these Coast Guard families, and we're happy to do it. And we've been told it's one of the biggest morale events of the year for the Coast Guard families, and we're up to 1,200 Coast Guard kids from every Coast Guard unit from the Canadian border down to Long Island, New York.
I've seen up close how much the visits of the Flying Santa mean to the Coast Guard families. Cindy, you've been at Coast Guard Station Portsmouth Harbor a couple of times when the Flying Santa arrived, right?
Yes, I have. We, meaning Friends of Portsmouth Harbor Lighthouses, try to coincide decorating Portsmouth Harbor Lighthouse for the holidays with Flying Santa's visit to the Coast Guard station there. That way the lighthouse looks festive for Flying Santa's arrival. Some of our volunteers get together in the cold. It's almost always really, really cold and windy to put up our lights and wreaths. And then we stay a little bit later to watch the helicopter land and to see Santa giving gifts to the Coast Guard kids.
Yeah. And have you noticed the reaction of the kids when Santa's coming in by helicopter?
Oh my goodness. I mean, I'm excited. It's exciting for me as an adult to watch it. So yeah, the kids are super excited.
Yeah. I've been there a number of times now for it, but I've also been at some of the other locations, mostly Coast Guard stations where Santa comes as part of this tradition. And it seems like there's always at least one kid, one little girl or boy who will, when Santa gets out of the helicopter, this one little kid will yell out, "Santa!" and run to Santa and give him a hug. It's like some kind of rule that has to happen, but they're so excited about it. Yeah. So it's really a very special tradition, and I hope it'll continue for many years to come.
Absolutely. If people would like to donate so that the Flying Santa can continue as a gesture of gratitude to the Coast Guard, it's possible to make a donation through the Friends of Flying Santa website at flyingsanta.org. There's also an online gift shop on the site where you can buy Flying Santa clothing, books, and other items.
Yeah, like the annual Flying Santa stuffed animal. Those are always, those are great. It's a husky this year, a white husky dog with the Flying Santa hoodie on. It's a different animal each year. You can actually buy some of the past year's animals on the site as well. You can collect them all. Yeah, they're great. So this year's flights have gone well. I just saw Brian last night. But Friends of Flying Santa is already fundraising for next year's flights. Every dollar is very helpful. So again, it's flyingsanta.org if people are interested in donating or checking out the online gift shop. So Cindy, let's tell everyone about Borden Flats Lighthouse and today's guests.
Sure, Jeremy. The city of Fall River, Massachusetts, situated where the Taunton River flows into Mount Hope Bay, was famed as the textile capital of the world in the 19th century. At one time, more than 100 cotton mills in Fall River employed over 30,000 people. A lighthouse was established on Borden Flats at the mouth of the Taunton River in 1881. It took the form of a cast iron tower on a caisson base with a fixed red light 47 feet above mean high water.
Borden Flats Lighthouse was battered in the hurricane of September 21st, 1938, like most lighthouses on New England's south-facing coast. The storm left the tower with a pronounced tilt, which it still has. A new, much wider cylindrical caisson was added around the old one to provide more protection.
In September 2006, it was announced that the lighthouse would be available for transfer to a suitable applicant under the guidelines of the National Historic Lighthouse Preservation Act. No organizations expressed interest, which meant that the lighthouse was sold at auction to the general public.
The sale of the lighthouse through an auction in 2008 couldn't be finalized, so another auction was held in 2010. The winner was Nick Korstad of Portland, Oregon, who bought the property for more than $56,000 with the intention of fixing it up and opening it to the public. In 2011, he gave the lighthouse a new color scheme with a red band and a red lantern roof.
Nick Korstad did much restoration of the lighthouse inside and out, and he made it available for public tours and overnight stays. In May 2018, he sold the property to a new owner, Kevin Ferias, who has continued opening it for overnight stays.
We have two guests today. Nick Korstad now owns the Big Bay Point Lighthouse Bed and Breakfast on Michigan's Upper Peninsula, while Kevin just finished another season at Borden Flats. I spoke with them in late October. The conversation covered a lot of ground, and I've divided it into two parts. We'll hear part one today and part two next week. So let's listen to part one of our conversation about Borden Flats Lighthouse now. I'm speaking this afternoon with Kevin Ferias and Nick Korstad, and we are going to be talking about a lighthouse that has played a very large and special role, I think, in both their lives. That lighthouse is Borden Flats in Fall River, Massachusetts. And thank you so much for joining me today, Nick and Kevin. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Be here.
And I want to, before we get into some questions here, I want to encourage you both to respond. If either of you says anything and the other one wants to respond in some way, throw something in, whatever it might be, comment, question to each other, anything like that, I encourage you to please speak up, because I want this to be just a friendly, casual kind of three-way conversation here. So, Kevin, it's a pleasure meeting you for the first time. Nick, I've known for, geez, how many years now, Nick? It's been a few.
I think we're going on over a decade now.
Yeah, easily over a decade. And I just spent a week at your beautiful Big Bay Point Lighthouse in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. That was fantastic last April. Thank you again for getting me to, geez, like 60 lighthouses? Maybe it was 30. I don't know. It was a lot of lighthouses.
We visually saw 40.
Okay, yeah, including little dots in the distance, but it was a great week. So let me start with you, Nick. As we said, we've known each other a long time. You've been on the podcast a couple of times, and I spent some time with you recently. But fill in a little bit for our listeners. Remind all of us where you're from and how you first became involved with lighthouses.
Yeah, so I'm originally from the West Coast. I kind of split time between Portland, Oregon, and Sequim, Washington. And it was the Dungeness Lighthouse that was in Sequim that really got me more sparked. I liked lighthouses prior to that, but having a lighthouse keeper there until I think around 94 kind of got me wanting to do this. And then when they took the keeper away, seeing what the U.S. Lighthouse Society had done with getting the keepers program and saving that lighthouse kind of stuck with me. And through the years, I figured, one day it was a good time to start buying these lighthouses when they started selling them. But that was an interesting subject because they weren't easy when they first started selling them to purchase. They
Right.
came with a lot of strings and stuff like that. So, but again, it was mostly just something that's been since my childhood. So I can't explain where it came from. The urge, it was just an urge, a craving.
Yeah. Well, I can believe me. I understand. If anybody understands, I understand. And our mutual friend, of course, Chad Kaiser, is the manager of the new Dungeness Lighthouse. It is New Dungeness. Yeah. I keep having a slip there because I was just in England. I visited the old Dungeness Lighthouse
So I get confused with all that. And there is an old and new Dungeness Lighthouse in England as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, New Dungeness Lighthouse in Washington. So Chad, our friend, is the manager there. He's been on the podcast as well. Yes. Well, let me ask you first, why did you decide to buy Borden Flats Lighthouse in 2010? How did that happen?
The first lighthouse I'd purchased was the Wolf Trap Lighthouse in Virginia. And not knowing anything about logistics of these offshore lights, I was about 2.5 miles, I think, from the nearest shoreline. And I learned the lesson that, it's not going to be easy to access. And so when Borden Flats came up, it's only about maybe 2,500 feet offshore from a marina. And I figured, okay, so for this to be functional, it's inland and it's easy to at least get to, until I purchased it and realized that it was in a southwest wind channel at the mouth of a river, and that the waves and stuff out there on every day in the summer can be more extreme than the open ocean, but that's for Kevin to answer.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Kevin, I'm going to get to you in just a second, but Nick, why did you end up more recently selling Borden Flats Lighthouse and buying Big Bay Point Lighthouse in Michigan? I think that was 2018. Is that right that you did that? Yeah.
So my overall goal when I started, buying the lighthouses and selling them, and in essence, kind of, I guess I would say flipping them, was to get one on land. But unfortunately, I wasn't born with a trust fund or lots of money. So I had to work my way through, the offshore lights, the ones that most people didn't want to pay for or adopt. And that was the avenue. And Borden Flats was a good spot. For some reason, you were very helpful and, helping me with advertising and stuff like that. And it became very popular. So when Kevin stepped forth, he provided the next puzzle piece to allow me to move forward and purchase Big Bay, to which I can live in and drive my car to. And, it's just a little less stressful, I think.
Yeah. I actually went out with you. It was actually the first time you visited Borden Flats Lighthouse, right? With your mom?
Yeah.
Right.
I remember, we left, the Coast Guard. I think we met at the marina, and it was a cold day. I remember seeing icicles.
It was December. I think it was December.
I think the week before it was like 70 degrees. And then we got there in like the cold snap, but it was a very, very derelict building when we toured it. It wasn't much to the property.
Yeah. I want to get more into that shortly, but let me turn to Kevin. And first of all, Kevin, are you from Rhode Island originally? Is that correct?
I am originally from Warren, Rhode Island, which is actually just a stone's throw away from Borden Flats across Mount Hope Bay. So
yeah.
I grew up in the area, boating in the area, and ironically, probably drove by Borden Flats 1,000 times, either by water or over the Braga Bridge on the highway, looking down at it, and always admired it. And it was ironic how it all kind of came together. It's a very interesting story. But thanks.
Well, we want to hear that.
Oh, okay. Yeah. All right, so I'll start from the beginning. We were celebrating, my wife and I, our 25th anniversary. And I thought I would surprise her. I'm the lighthouse enthusiast. She's not so much, but
I know what that's like.
Yeah, I had always wanted to stay in a lighthouse. And for those who are familiar with Newport, Rhode Island, we have Rose Island Lighthouse, beautiful island lighthouse there. So I tried to book an evening for our exact anniversary date, which was August 24th. And unfortunately got online, did a Google search and contacted them, and they were completely sold out. The ironic thing was in the Google search, the number 2, obviously listing said Borden Flats Lighthouse. And I thought that was a little strange, having been in the area, knowing about the lighthouse, and had absolutely zero idea that it was available for overnights. And but Nick's phone number was there, and I gave it a call, and luckily he was available on August 24th. And I gotta say, we went out. It was an absolutely gorgeous summer night. I loved every second of it, fell in love with the lighthouse. And also, weirdly, as soon as I walked in, I really felt that I had been there before, and never have obviously. So Nick was a great host, and we got friendly after the stay. And being a photographer, I had volunteered to come out and photograph the lighthouse anytime he liked. We had several conversations, and in one of those conversations, I think I said, hey, if you're ever going to sell this place, let me know. I live right across the bay. And Nick didn't forget that. And when it was when it was time to sell Borden Flats, I know that he had put a listing out there, and I eventually saw it, and I gave him a quick call, and he called me back and said, guess what? I'm not going to need the photos. And I said, why? And he said, I'm selling. And that just really sparked it for me. I did not sleep for weeks after that, with the possibility of figuring out a way how I might be able to purchase it and continue the legacy that Nick has started. But unfortunately, I remember the phone call from Nick was in January. And I immediately got off the phone and said to my wife, honey, our lighthouse, it's for sale. And she said, honey, we ain't buying no lighthouse. At the time, both our kids were still in college, and we didn't have two nickels to rub together to even think about a purchase like that. So, but I dreamed about it night after night, and eventually, a couple of months later, Nick called and said, hey, are you interested? I'm ready to sell, and I know you have the passion for it, and I just wanted to make sure that to see if you were interested. Little did he know, I had actually gone to 7 local banks in the area looking for a loan to purchase it, and was turned down by every one of them. Very simply, they said the underwriters would never ever want to finance an offshore lighthouse in the middle of the bay. And so I couldn't get a loan. And so I had to tell them that, unfortunately, I'm kind of, out of the race here on trying to purchase it. I just couldn't get the funding. Remarkably, I think Nick pretty much felt that, he wanted me to have this lighthouse over. I know he had a couple other buyers ready to go. And amazingly, he's the one who gave me the idea, because he said, well, if you can't get a bank loan, did you consider a home equity loan? And I thought, no, I hadn't. Quickly called my bank. Unfortunately, what I had in equity was about half of what the asking price was. And again, that bank said the same thing. They would not give me a bridge loan to make the difference. So I was so depressed. And I had to call Nick back and say, I'm really sorry, I'm out of the running here. And he was very disappointed. And I just remember a few days passed. He called me on a Monday morning in my office, and he said, guess what? My mom and I discussed the sale, and we decided that we wanted no one else in the world to own this lighthouse but you. And remarkably, they had said, if you can get the funding, we would be happy to give it to you for, what your home equity loan is available to you, which was absolutely amazing. I started shaking. I remember I got off, I raced out of my office. I ran to my bank, and I told him the situation, and I said, because Nick, weren't you closing within a few days, or you were getting ready to agree to the sale?
So what happened here at Big Bay is the bank would only do a 50% loan because they didn't want to finance a lighthouse.
See?
To the dollar is what I needed for a down payment. I said, you know what? This is an opportunity here of a lifetime. I'm not going to be greedy on Borden Flats. And I said, hey, this is what I need for a down payment. Let's offer that to Kevin. And, we both won out. So I have to say,
which was absolutely gracious. And I can't thank you and your family enough for allowing me the opportunity. The funny thing is that as I raced to my bank, and I went into the bank manager and I told him, I said, I need to get these funds like within a couple of days. I mean, what kind of application process is there, et cetera, et cetera. And he left his office and he walked back in 2 minutes later with a check. And I just started shaking, and I called Nick immediately and I said, Nick, I've got the check. So we were both happy. And a few days later, I owned a lighthouse, and it's been the most fascinating 5 years ever since.
I would say that was probably one of the fastest lighthouse sales in our career.
Wow.
That sold, I think it sold in literally 2 weeks almost. Basically, it was.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was crazy. And here's the ironic thing: Nick had obviously had some reservations. I'll never forget. We closed on a Wednesday afternoon on the lighthouse, and that night he had guests, and he said, "Well, guess what? You're going to have to come shadow me, because I need to get to Big Bay by Saturday morning." And so that Wednesday night, I shadowed him. Thursday, he took me on a tour of the lighthouse to show me, how to operate it and whatnot. And wasn't it Thursday morning, like 3 a.m, you jumped in your car and drove to Big Bay, and there I was on my own, trial by fire.
Sink or swim.
Started entertaining the guests, and have been doing it for five years now.
Yeah. From experience, I know that, Nick, you're persuasive and generous. So I just wanted to throw that in.
Absolutely.
Hey, we can't take it with us. And so if it works, I always tell people, don't be greedy. If you can get ahead in life, and nothing looks good in the lighthouse community of when you take a lighthouse and make it $2-3 million off of it and have paid $50,000 for it. So, it doesn't look good on you in the community. So.
Sounds good to me. So Kevin, just a little bit more about your background. I understand you have a background in video production. I think you're coming to us today from your video studio there. Is that right?
Yes. I've actually been a video producer and photographer for 42 years now. And I'm currently employed with a large construction organization. I've been here 26 years. So it has been difficult to continue my full-time career and also almost practically full-time operating and managing a lighthouse. So it's been a lot. Yeah.
I was reading some biographical material about you online, and apparently you've had a lot of involvement with youth sports and also teaching video production to is it high school students?
Yeah. As my kids were, they're in their mid-20s now, but as my kids were going through junior high and high school, and obviously played sports, I volunteered, and I ended up being the president of our local Little League for 12 years, coach, vice president, chief cook and bottle washer, I guess. And at the same time, too, convinced our schools, that some kids might be interested in a video program. So we actually started a TV station. I donated a lot of my older equipment, and we started a TV station in the school where we did live news broadcasts every morning. And basically, when the principal does the morning announcements, we did them live with students as anchors.
Wow.
And I taught them video production, editing, we built our own teleprompters, things like that. So that was fun doing that through the 4 or 5 years that my kids were going through school. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that is fantastic. It brings back some memories. When I was in high school, which was a long time ago, I'm talking early 1970s, this one English teacher started a video production class. Nothing like that had ever been done at that school before. And I think there was a black and white camera and monitor borrowed from somewhere else, like one day a week, that we got to use, and we put on a play or something and videotaped it. So that was my first exposure to video production. But it's such a great thing. Obviously, TV plays such a big role in everybody's lives, and it's important to know how to use it. And those of us in the Lighthouse community are still trying to figure out how to use it to our best advantage. Maybe that's something you and I could talk about sometime.
Absolutely.
Kevin.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let me just ask you kind of answered this already in a way, because you talked about the local lighthouses there and how you were interested, but would you say you were a lighthouse aficionado before you bought Borden Flats Lighthouse, Kevin?
Well, not from a historical standpoint, but from a visual standpoint as a photographer. Growing up and living in Rhode Island and Narragansett Bay, and then of course Mount Hope Bay, I had been so interested in photographing all the lighthouses in the area, and so just and again just felt like maybe in a past life there was some connection there. But I've always loved lighthouses. and love the visual parts of them, and try to always perfect wonderful photographs of the ones that I've visited. So yeah, I've only really got into the history part of it, once I got involved with Borden Flats.
Yeah. So Nick, I want to get back to you. You were starting to talk a little bit about the shape the lighthouse was in when you bought it, Borden Flats.
Yeah.
Can you say a little bit more about that? Of course, I was there on your first visit, so I have some idea what it was like. But what were the challenges you faced right away when you bought it?
I think honestly, the lighthouse was, of ones that have been auctioned off, was probably the interior was the cleanest. It was pretty like broom swept inside. But as far as exterior goes, the case on everything was so rusted out, the paint and everything like that. And the birds had really, found a refuge out there. And I remember cleaning out those gutters. And I think I got like 55-gallon buckets of bird guano. And I don't know how the poles even could support all the weight from that. And I just remember dumping it all down on the foundation below. And then a lot of the concrete on the top, I know there was about a 20 by 15 foot section that was gone. Remember, on the back, it was just all gravel. And I remember having to bring bags of concrete out there on a Zodiac. And I remember I filled the Zodiac up with so much concrete once that it started to go torpedo down into the water. And I had to reverse it really fast so that it wouldn't sink. I was like, all right, 20 bags of concrete is too much. We better, go back to the dock as fast as we can get. But other than that, it was more of a cosmetic situation. That was a pretty structurally sound structure. There wasn't anything that I noticed or anyone else noticed that was severe.
Yeah.
And it might have just been that its location and that it had that lower foundation that was just an easier one for the Coast Guard to keep properly maintained. Because we get to other spark plug lighthouses, such as like Hog Island Shoal, the thing's coming apart at all the seams, but it's in the same district, but it's a lot more challenging to access.
Yeah. Borden Flats does have a slight tilt, right? Because from the hurricane of 38, right?
Yeah, the stories I've heard, is that, where that red stripe is on the center, that the water went above that red stripe, and then the waves were going over the top of the lantern room. So I don't know if that's true or not. But the other reason why the place could be so stout is that the damage from that hurricane, the government actually went and fixed it. So it was technically all reinforced and adding that lower case on it. There's actually two caissons there. There was the one that was replaced, I want to say, maybe in the 50s or 60s. And maybe Kevin knows. He has the structure plans. Maybe it was sooner than that, maybe 70s or 80s, that they put another round of that sheet pile around and back.
Yeah, that was 63, according to the records. Okay. So yeah.
So it's got three foundations on it, so it shouldn't go anywhere.
Yeah. To clarify again, it had the original caisson it was built on in 1882, 1881. Yeah. Yep. And then after the hurricane of 38, they reinforced it with a much wider base and steel shell on the outside of that.
Steel shell, yeah.
I think it was really similar to like Sharp's Island Lighthouse, where that one in Chesapeake Bay, where it's tilted at like 20 degrees from the ice flows. I think it was a similar situation where the water pressure just kind of tilted it more into the mud, and I don't think it would ever tip over, but it's nice to have that lower foundation.
Yeah. Well, Sharp's Island the tilt there is, like you said, like 20%. It's a really extreme tilt, but Borden Flats is probably more like 1 or 2%. It's not much.
Yeah, they say it's about 5 degrees.
5 degrees.
Hardly visible, but there is an angle that you can catch, and I've caught it on camera. Where you see it quite often. But thankfully, they did do the second caisson because that allows a much larger apron or deck for our guests to enjoy. Where we can put out, lounge chairs and tables. And matter of fact, when I was purchasing, the engineer that came out had calculated that with different events, we can fit upwards of 200 people, cocktail style, standing up and whatnot on that deck. And shortly after I had purchased it from Nick, we did have a fundraiser for local charity, and we had 100 people out there, and it was delightful, very, very comfortable. So yeah, thankfully, the Coast Guard did, put that second caisson on there. to give us a much more spatial area for entertaining and whatnot.
Sure. Yeah, I've been there. I've experienced that. Yeah, it is nice and roomy. Yeah. So Nick, you actually lived in the lighthouse for a while when you were fixing it up, right?
Yeah, for 6 months.
Wow.
I figured it would be cheaper to live out there, not pay rent. And then I learned it was way more expensive to live off the grid out there. And winter was not fun. So that's when I became like a couch surfer at my friend's house. And she let me live on her couch for, I want to say like a year or two, to be honest with you, because, everyone knew they wanted that lighthouse saved. And they were so curious, the community, what is he doing out there? And so they're, here, sleep with me and do this. So they could almost be part of the inside track of, oh, he's staying at my house. And so I get to hear what's going on and we get to go out to the lighthouse. And, when something's off limit for so long, but yet visual to everyone, it really piques their curiosity. But to be honest with you, the hardest challenge to live out there was, I know we'll get into it, is the ghosts out there. They would drive me nuts.
Okay. Yeah, I do want to save that a little bit. But I was going to say, thinking about what you just said, I was out there one day with you, and I remember a couple of local guys showed up who just, apparently they visited quite a bit. I think there were, a couple of Fall River guys. I don't know if you remember that at all, but they, it's sort of like it was their lighthouse. Like they just, which you can understand. Local people often feel like the local lighthouse is like a centerpiece of the community and it belongs to the community. So you must have had both of you probably had a lot of experience of that sort of thing.
We still do. Yeah. I wish we could find more of the locals that have history behind them, family members and whatnot. I hear from a lot of the folks. Matter of fact, a lot of the guests that have come to stay overnight, once they learned that it was available, about how when they were kids, they would actually swim from the shore out to the lighthouse and use it as their diving board or fish off it and things like that. And one of the unfortunate things, and I'm sure Nick can back me up on this, is that when the lighthouse in 1963 was automated and the keepers removed, and it went virtually abandoned from 63 until Nick came to resurrect her. I'm told that so many locals got out there and broke in and stole everything, and to the point where we really have zero historical items from the lighthouse. And I know Nick, when he purchased, he told me he went on a search to try to find whatever he could locally, but to no avail. And that's the sad thing that I find is like logbooks and things like that. And I read how a lot of the accents within the construction inside, they had brass railings and brass doorknobs, and the portholes were brass, all totally torn out, ripped, which left the lighthouse completely exposed, like Nick said, to birds and weather. And I know he's being humble, but from the photos I've seen, it was a mess. And what he did to turn that lighthouse around is simply amazing. And as you know, Jeremy, he was awarded Lightkeeper of the Year. He won't mention that, I'm sure.
They got a Keeper of the Light award from the American Lighthouse Foundation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Back in 2018, to celebrate his efforts. So we wouldn't have this beautiful gem that everyone is enjoying, if Nick did not make that commitment and that passion. So we're forever grateful.
Yes, I second everything you just said.
To go back in on that, there's one spot on that lighthouse that I never touched. And I'm not sure if Kevin has ever gotten into the old cistern in there.
Oh, okay.
It looked like someone had filled it up with trash to the top. And I was like, there's no way in heck I'm climbing into this. But for all you know, there could be a Fresnel lens sitting down in there. You never know.
Right. No, I've thought about kind of getting a ladder and trying to get up over there, but it looks a little creepy in there. So I kind of stayed away.
Definitely. I remember peeking in there and thinking it looked pretty creepy. So Nick, why did you paint a red stripe around the lighthouse?
To be honest with you, red is my favorite color. So, people know when I've been to a lighthouse, Hog Island Shoal has a red roof on it for a reason, but it was just a visual thing. We had those Brayton Point cooling towers that were not in any of the pictures when I bought it.
Right. Just to clarify, they're talking about a power plant.
Yeah. It was a coal-fired tower with the nuclear-looking cooling tower.
Right. Everybody thought it was a nuclear plant, but it wasn't. Yep.
And so when you would come down the channel, you would see the pillars from the Braga Bridge, and then you would see the cooling towers, and then there was a lighthouse out there, and you really honestly don't really notice it until you get right up on it. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, well, people kept running into these piles of rocks around the lighthouse. And so I was like, I need to figure out a way of making this place look like a Harbor Lights model. And I was like, we need to add some color to it and, change it up a little bit. And the Coast Guard doesn't really use day marks anymore. And so the title didn't have anything distinguishing that it had to remain the original color. But the Coast Guard did contact me, I think in like 2013, or maybe 2014, and said, when did this get this red stripe on it? And I said, well, I don't know, like 2 years ago, but you're welcome to paint it back. And they said, oh, no, we'll just change the charts. So, but, once that stripe got on there, all of a sudden people are like, boom, what is this out here? And then when you get next to it, it just, I don't know, it just makes the structure more inviting to, I think.
I agree with you. It took me a little while to kind of buy into that. Being, kind of a lighthouse historian, kind of a purist. Yeah. I thought, well, geez, it never, this is a day mark that it never had historically. It seemed strange to me at first, and the more I looked at it, the more I thought, wow, this was brilliant. I mean, it looks so much more attractive, as you said, more inviting, and it shows up so much better from shore and from boats and so forth. So,
well, and I think originally it was painted bright red. And then it went to like a brown color, and then it went to white. So it's kind of incorporating a little bit. The caisson I paint above brown to kind of represent the original, and then the red and white, and then there's black on the lantern. But having the top of those lantern rooms black, as you know, at Portsmouth Harbor, will make it to where it's about 200 degrees during the summer. So painting the top red really does help, drop about 30 degrees off that lantern room. So yeah,
interesting point. And so Coast Guard painted some lanterns green back, I'm going to say probably around the 1970s, 80s, maybe. Little River Light up in Maine, owned by the American Lighthouse Foundation. I think the green faded to a very light green, and now it continues to be painted in that light green color, which probably keeps it a lot cooler in the lantern room.
Yeah, it's unique too. Every time I see it, I'm like, where do they get that green color from? But probably what you're saying, it faded, and someone's like, oh, this is the color.
Yeah, I believe that's what happened. So, Kevin, you're in your 5th year of owning the Lighthouse. Have you done any major restoration projects in that time?
Absolutely not. Nick pretty much left
did that for you.
Did it all for us. Yeah, I mean, except for cosmetics. We've painted it a couple of times, and it's just minor repairs, rust, some metal parts and structural parts that have rusted out where we've re-welded and things, but mostly it's just been, like I said, cosmetic. And being that it's a full-time overnight facility now, just updated furniture and internal things to make the stay a little bit more comfortable for guests and a little bit more modern. Although I have many guests that keep saying, stop modernizing it. We want to stay. We like the idea of glamping a little bit more than But again, I've just come from actually a hospitality background way back when, and just try to keep it as comfortable and cozy and updated as possible. So I mean, my major goal was to try to improve the ladder system for guests, and unfortunately we came up with several different design ideas, and none of which the Coast Guard really favored, and just quite simply because anything attached to the side of the caisson they feared might break off at some point in the storm, and being that it's an active channel, they did not want to chance that. So we're sticking with the original caisson and the nice steel rungs that are there. Makes it a little bit more difficult to get things up and down, but that's all part of the fun.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it.
Speaking of bags of concrete, Nick, slop them over my shoulder and just carry them up, and you do whatever you had to do. It's always amazing too, because as when we have our guests arrive, we give them about an hour and a half tour of the lighthouse and tell all the stories from when Nick owned it and the different things that he did. And we always talk about how that we're trying to keep its original flavor, but I want to be able to have more people enjoy the lighthouse. And far too often I have our more elder population who either grew up in the area and would love to be able to visit the lighthouse that they saw as children, but it's not as easy, and you got to be fairly ambulatory to climb that exact vertical ladder. So we have attempted to try to upgrade that, but have not been able to come up with anything functional enough that it's worth making the investment type of thing at this point. You're talking driving pilings around and changing the look of the light and things. So we've just kind of left it as is, and folks still love it. Oh, as you said, it's part of the charm in a way. That's not the easiest place to get into, but for me, the offshore lights that take a little work to get into are always the most fun anyway.
To learn more about Borden Flats Lighthouse and the overnight stays, go to bordenflats.com. Reservations have already filled up for 2023, and Kevin Ferias is taking reservations for 2024.
Both Nick and Kevin have done a fantastic job there, and it's so great that the public has the opportunity to stay overnight at an offshore caisson lighthouse. In part 2 next week, we talk about the ghost stories of Borden Flats Lighthouse, and there are a lot of them.
And rumor has it that Kevin Ferias makes a special announcement in part 2.
As a matter of fact, that's right. I'll give the secret away now. The lighthouse is for sale. But you can hear more about it in much more detail in next week's episode. So check it out.
Okay. As always, we want to thank all the members, volunteers, and staff of the U.S. Lighthouse Society and its chapters and affiliates. To learn more about preservation grants, the Passport Program, the Research Catalog, domestic and international tours, and all the things the Society offers, go to uslhs.org.
If you listen through Apple Podcasts, be sure to rate and review us. If you have ideas for this podcast, you can email me at jeremy@uslhs.org.
The philosopher and statesman Francis Bacon once wrote, quote, "In order for the light to shine so brightly, the darkness must also be present," unquote.
Wishing everyone a Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Next week's episode will feature part 2 of the Borden Flats interview. As always, to all our regular listeners and our new ones, thanks so much for listening, and
keep a good light.
Out in the dark, I'm gonna let it shine. Out in the dark, I'm gonna let it shine. Out in the dark, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine.